Hey-o.
Hey, does EFI do that?
That's what I would say. That's right, I haven't done any video with this so far. Let's see. Somebody run through the basics of it. What is this thing?
Small block Ford 434.
Small block Ford 434.
Or
more
people know Gen 1's LS.
A Gen 1 LS, yeah. Haters.
C3 heads.
What's the bottom, or what's the motor good for? Motor's good for less than what the supercharger is meant for.
Cast crank. Yeah. Cast steel crank.
Wait, really?
Pull out from the lightning.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've already like worked a decent amount on this, trying to get it started up and everything. We started up on ethanol. We fought this whole trigger setup for a while now. There was a couple other things that were kind of making it worse than it probably should have been. I mean, ideally, we did everything right.
We did everything right.
Like it should have, we maybe would have fumbled with it for maybe like 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something, but we had a couple of wires that were screwing us a little bit. We were chasing down what we thought was our problem, but it was actually a wiring issue. And in that troubleshooting, we found a couple of other things that would have later on down the road kind of screwed us. So glad we got to those before we even tried getting it started up, because it would have just baffled us even more. So once we got the trigger settings good, we were able to figure out which wire was actually mismatched. We had a wrong wire on the crank trigger plug. And then actually I think we had some issues with the coils and some issues with the injectors, but got that all done. Hey, what about this TPS? Is it reliable-ish?
Yeah.
Or is it still rigged, kind of?
Yeah, kind of.
All right. Nothing wrong with a little rigging.
It's kind of worked up.
I mean,
Hey, just
It's
send
fine
it.
for today.
yeah.
He was supposed to. This shit just keeps pumping, bro.
Hold it
Oh
up.
yeah, you gotta hold it up higher.
Hold it up.
What docs do with. We're fucking learning. Hey, you want to pour the rest of that in? Come here,
Hold
come here, come
it
here.
up. Open your little cap. And it'll bleed back down in there.
I told you.
You told me what?
I was gonna say, you put it back in there, it's gonna keep falling out.
Oh, that makes the video.
Yeah. Fuck. Y'all said all I gotta do is drive. This motherfucker's still pouring.
It's still gonna keep pouring it out of the barrel though, isn't it?
Yeah, because gravity's gonna take it. Siphoning. There we go. Fuck that piece. God damn.
I guess the idea behind it is gonna be there's way more blower than motor.
Motor.
7-0 car.
So yeah, 7.0. So what we're trying to do here is do boost control via this blow-off valve. So we're gonna have a solenoid that's gonna control this. This one's gonna act like a normal blow-off valve, but we're gonna be using a solenoid to govern how much pressure goes to the top or the bottom of this, either helping it to open or helping it to stay closed. So hopefully we can bleed off enough of the boost that this thing is gonna do, because it's geared to what? Do like 40 something pounds or at a higher RPM than we're probably going to use. Basic concept is shit ton of blower, not that much motor. So we're going to see if we can actually turn it down with boost control and of course, you know, timing control and whatnot.
If you're pouring it, yeah.
But hopefully we can bleed off enough boost using those to where, you know, we can keep the motor happy. But then the nice thing is that what it might end up being is the RPM that we're able to launch at. It'll be able to make the full boost right off the bat.
Yep.
So maybe it ends up acting like a, you know, nitrous car, being capable of having all the power right off the bat. So we'll see. But started up good on the ethanol. Now we just gotta switch it over to methanol, and hopefully that's not as hard as people make it seem. It's an engine, it's another fuel. I don't see any issue with it. I'll show you what changes we're gonna make inside the computer. Majority of it's just gonna be pretty big number of changes to like the main fuel table and a couple of the support tables. But then the biggest thing is gonna be changing our whole target. So we're gonna actually use the methanol scale. So all of our numbers like right now are targeting like a normal gasoline to where it's like, you know, 14.5 at idle. Well, now it's gonna be like 4.0 at idle, or you know, 3.9 or something like that. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more runtime out of it, because with the methanol it's going to keep things a hell of a lot cooler. Before we were only getting to run it for about 5 minutes, and then we get hot to the point where we need to shut it down. But we'll see. It's all kind of
Can you cut?
new to a couple of us. I mean, like hopefully we're not gonna look stupid out there, like hooking up a pump to it. And
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't mind looking stupid.
130 strapped to an Eagle crank, small block forward, and a convertible.
So I already kind of look a little stupid, huh?
Yeah, don't tell nobody we got an Eagle crank in there.
So what we're thinking of as far as cooling between rounds, because I mean I don't know how fast it's going to cool down, and we want to be able to have a quick turnaround in case we need to. If it's going to the final, I mean, how much time are they really going to give us between the final?
Yeah.
We need to be able to turn it around in half an hour at the
Yeah.
like slowest. Thinking of, you know, putting a fitting on there and just blasting air through the motor, because we don't want to put water in there at all, so it's not a spill issue if it decides to hurt itself. But then we don't want to put water in there in between passes because it'll shock it and hurt shit. So we're just thinking, I mean, if everybody else puts fans on the outside of this thing, would it be even better if we put a fitting on here and in between rounds we just blast air through it? Goes through the whole system as though it was going, you know, through the water jacket. Maybe it'll bleed off the heat a lot faster. Come up with something. Rig a leaf blower or something to go down to a nozzle right there. This is one way to get rid of Corona. Just fill the air with a bunch of methanol. And for anybody thinking that we're being bitches about doing this, so we're in an enclosed garage. It's gonna get fumy as shit in here, especially because I don't know what the airfield is gonna be right off the back. Maybe a little fat. So
Look real for them.
screw you.
I got a whole box of them in the trailer over there. Oh, are we ready?
Yeah, we're in.
Oh, well, hold on.
Where's my ass?
I'm not gonna be wearing my hat.
You're cool like us and wear backwards.
Beard is gonna be.
Your fucking beard is weird.
Where do you guys get those things from?
China.
Those things are badass. Where do you want them?
We don't fuck around over here, son. Let's go up and fuel pressure. Okay. Already, huh? Yeah. Where are you moving?
Hey, it cranked up on the first time though.
No, that's probably. Oh, geez.
I got a nice little like bend in my beard from the mask now. All right, so that went surprisingly smooth. I made a mistake in the beginning, I'll admit. The first time that we tried started it up, I had loaded in a map that I already put together as a methanol startup. I forgot to change the scale to methanol, and so my target airfield table was set up for methanol, but the scale that it was in was still in gasoline. So it was telling me that it needed more and more fuel because it was like 7.0 or something like that. And so since I was targeting 4.0, it was just, telling it I need more and more fuel. So I'm just like dumping it in. And it's crazy because the methanol, apparently you can get away with murder because the actual air fuel that it probably was like 2.0. It was still idling. It was idling a little bit low, like it was definitely, too much fuel going in there, but it was still able to idle. And the cool thing was that the temp stayed really, really low. The engine temp stayed low because we were pouring so much of the methanol in there. I mean, Nick was able to put his hand on the head and it was like cool to the touch. So pretty cool how, based on how much fuel we're putting into it, it really makes a big change to the engine temp. Pouring so much fuel in there that it takes away that heat pretty efficiently. So it's pretty amazing. So once we got the target air fuel correct, I took a bunch of fuel out. It did start coming up in temp a little bit. We had it go up to about 130. Can't really trust the coolant temp sensor because it's in the head, but it's not in water. There's no water in this motor at all. So keep in mind the amount of time that we were running it and everything, there was no water in it. So it's pretty crazy how much that fuel actually governs temperature. So revved a little bit. Not going to be able to really do a whole lot until we can actually start rolling it. So I don't know if he's going to try to take it out, and street drive it a little bit, or if we're just going to wait for the dyno to where we can roll through, do different loads, and start actually tuning it. But that's probably going to be next weekend. But so far, yeah, I mean, that was an easy transition. We started out with ethanol, got it running and starting up good and idling and everything, and switched over to methanol. A little bit of a hiccup, but that was pretty much my part. Probably would have started right up and idled no problem on our first guess. But it's probably, I mean, I think the way it sits right now, not being on a battery charger or anything like that, I bet you we could probably just start it up, you know, outside of the car, no throttle or nothing. Still got some to learn about, you know, what our run time is going to be able to be, what temp we need to run it at, what temp we're going to be able to look at it and say, all right, it's too hot. But since we have so much control over the engine temp based on how much fuel we put into it, I'm wondering if we can make kind of a setting almost to, like if it's starting to get a little bit warm, or if he knows that it's going to be a long time before he does a run and he's got it running for a while, I'm wondering if we can make a dash switch to change the target air fuel to something a lot richer, so that it kind of slows down the amount of heat that goes into the motor. So something we're thinking about doing, we'll see. But that's a lot more motivating that it stayed that cool, because the time that we're going to be able to spend on the dyno to get it cooled down, hopefully it's going to be a lot easier to do. So we'll see here in a bit.
You want to race?
Well, so if we're not driving around, do we have a reason to start it? Besides shits and giggles?
Fire it up.
Fire it up.
See if it starts on its own completely.
Yeah.
Might take a try or two, I don't know.
Put a ground holder in there. Put a ground holder in there. Oh yeah, not let me get out of footage.
Oh no, you're fine.
How long you want to let it run?
It's up to you. I mean, so that sensor in there, 130 is what we stopped it at. The coolant temp. No, you can do whatever you want. I just wanted to see if it would start up on its own perfectly fine. Okay.
How much is fuel?
Alright, take it out for a rip.
Rip it.
Do a small hit. Do a burnout.
Kids.
Garage burnout.
You got a cool.
Do you have to like start a coal fire underneath the carb to get it warm before you can fire it up?
The Kindle, they put some little kindling in there. Spark it with some flint.
Hey, don't let me come over here and don't make me get up and push my button.
Start winding it up.
Hey, don't make me get up and push my button before you get that thing started.
Listen, you just put that motherfucker out on the street and drag your ass.
You just, I'm getting.
Do this. Do it.
Oh, I don't even have to.
Max the throttle.
This car's first race.
You want to try it again?
Oh, they got no fuel in the carburetor.
Hit it.
That's what I would say.
I thought yours was already running.
I turned mine off to hear yours. I couldn't hear it.
Good, I couldn't hear it. My fuel pump was on.
Oh, you got to turn that on? Let me get my fire extinguisher in case something happens.
Boom.
Give us some gas.
Give us some throttle.
I don't know if there's much fuel up there yet.
I remember my first time.
Is that a mechanical pump?
No.
No? I run off the alcohol.
I'll run off and leave your ass with this thing up to fire up.
Hey, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle.
Oh, shit. All you gotta do is pull it out on the street.
It looks like I'm ahead of the game. Shit don't start.
Get yours out, I have mine started.
I'll run out of fucking methanol if this thing starts.
Pulls the hood off, carburetor's off.
Let me get a screwdriver. You don't even.
Probably. Oh, right there. There's a drop.
Well, it's not supposed to be that long so that you forget.
All I need is one switch. Where's your fuel cell? Back here?
Pump the gas. See if you get any in.
Yeah, you got fuel.
Do you want me to start mine again?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, damn, I am.
She's scoring.
Put it to the
Started
floor.
in a month. Been a while.
Hey-o.
Hey, does EFI do that? Hell no.
Yeah. The thing I charge is battery. Turn the fuel pump on.
Your fan works.
Anyway, go EFI.
Pump the head.
It's running out of fuel.
You're out of fuel.
You're out of fuel. You're lucky.
Oh, okay.
Where's the 85 at? She stopped squirting. Right here? Damn, you've been out here hot rodding my shit. It was full.
He ain't been started in a month.
That's lucky.
I didn't even have to get in mine.
Well, that sounds, you may be lucky.
Hey, I didn't even have to get in mine. I started mine from the passenger window.
For 7 years over there, they just got it fired up tonight. I don't know your shit.
Is it running or not?
You give me some gas and we can go try it.
Let's get this. Look. Get this shit on video.
Be hating on my shit.
Fucking part-timer. Part-time.
It works part-time.
It lives up to its name.
That ain't right. Why you gotta hang on the street car?
Alright, you don't run.
I was just glad it started. I was like, oh, God, don't make me look like shit.
I was nervous. I was like, do I know how to start this motor?
First race of the season, you won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about that?
This thing won its first race already.
That was already worth the 30 grand.
Yeah.
Be like Johnny, went on technicality.
There you go. I ain't scared. I don't think I've ever won a race.
That's when you need to do this.
I hope it starts just as easy even when it's dead cold. I got a feeling it will. This 16-volt shit is pretty cool. I think that really helps a lot.
It's been sitting for a bit before I got here, and it started right up after you guys were done.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Shit, it started 4 days later.
Yeah.
Wednesday?
On the ethanol.
I think it rotated like 5 times.
That's what he said. He was like, man, that cold start's perfect. I was like, that was a stab in the dark. All right, guys. So before we end this video, I wanted to go over the couple of changes for anybody that actually wanted to see the tuning side of it. It was kind of an interesting transition from ethanol to methanol. So we didn't start this engine up on gas. We started it up on ethanol. The primary reason for that was we wanted there to be less fuel during the initial break-in of this motor. This is a brand spanking new motor. We wanted to make sure that we started it up on something that was going to require less fuel, so that even if we were a little bit off on the tune when we first initially started it, we hopefully wouldn't be pouring as much fuel into it as if we were way off on methanol. So the methanol target air fuel, the ideal fueling that would be required to start it up on methanol was going to be way more fuel volume. So if we were off, we risk. We just didn't want to, possibly ruin the seating of the rings right off the bat. So started up on ethanol, and that pretty much ran on a similar table to this. So this table didn't look a whole lot different. The major difference was that our fuel pressure was much, much lower. So actual system fuel pressure right here shows 75. We were probably around like 80 all said and done. Rated fuel pressure is 90. So when we first started up on ethanol, we were way below that. We were at about 50 psi. And for one major reason, which was the minimum pulse width of these injectors, which is 1.2 milliseconds, which is pretty awesome, by the way. A 700-pound injector, still has a minimum pulse width of 1.2. There's a lot of smaller injectors out there that don't have that good of a minimum pulse width. So that's pretty impressive. These are pretty nice injectors so far. So what we ran into was when we first started it up, to get a decent idling air fuel on the ethanol, we were pretty much already at 1.2 milliseconds on the injectors sitting there idling. So we couldn't really go up in fuel pressure. We wanted to on the ethanol, but there was no way we were going to be able to. If we did, we would have to take out duty cycle on the injector, and it would have started trying to dip below 1.2 milliseconds. We know, based on the manufacturer saying that this is the minimum open time, that they wouldn't be able to actually do it. The computer would be saying that it was actually, pulsing less than 1.2, but it wouldn't be. And so it would start stumbling. It would actually be, probably increasing fuel the lower we went. So we left it there, did the break-in process, couple of heat cycles on it, and when we went to switch over to methanol, we left it at 50 psi initially. And so once we put in the methanol, we ended up having to pretty much just highlight this whole damn table and increase it. I mean, this was just a rough thing. We just grabbed the whole table and increased it a lot. I mean, probably everything was probably double the number on this. And that got it running, but it still ran kind of crappy. And so I started thinking about the fact that these injectors are rated at 90 psi, and figured that was, for a reason, not just to be able to provide 700 pounds of fuel, probably also having to do with spray pattern. So the higher pressure, the better as far as spray pattern goes for the most part. And I assume that a injector that is designed to be able to provide that much fuel flow at a low pressure is probably not going to have that great of a spray pattern. It's like looking at water flowing out of a hose versus that same exact hose but with a nozzle on it. So, with no nozzle on it, it's capable of, allowing tons of fuel to come out. But if you don't have that, volume and pressure behind it, it's not going to give a very good spray pattern. It's just going to piddle out. So I think that's what was kind of going on. We were getting a decent air fuel ratio, but we weren't actually atomizing a whole lot of the fuel. So we started turning up the base fuel pressure, and it really, really cleaned everything up. Started idling much, much more crisp. We were able to control it a lot better. And so we will probably, on the dyno, turn that up to 90 psi. I think we're going to go ahead and just put it up to 90 psi, because once we turned up the fuel pressure, we were able to chop these values way down, almost to the point where it was previously when it was running on the ethanol. So we don't have these giant exaggerated numbers or anything like that. They make decent sense considering the fuel. So I prefer that much more than having these values really, really high. So when we get to the dyno, more than likely when we turn the base pressure up to 90 psi, which is really only about 10 psi more than where we're at right now, these values may get a little bit smaller, probably not by a crazy amount, but at that point, we're good with our base fuel pressure. And the injector should be operating at their best, because our actual fuel pressure will match our rated fuel pressure. And so all of these numbers will be spot on pretty much. Right now we're kind of at the mercy of whatever calculation Holley does in the background. So all of these numbers are based on a 90 psi base pressure. And so when we say actual system pressure is lower than that, Holley's doing a calculation in the background to change these opening times based on that pressure, because otherwise I would have to put in completely different numbers for that different pressure. I'm hoping it does that. I think it does that, and that's why it runs as good as it does. But this will be best case scenario. We put our actual system pressure to the same as our rated injector pressure, so that these numbers are spot on. That's what I'm hoping anyway. All right, so really there was only maybe two other tables that we kind of touched up a little bit, and I honestly the startup tables that we touched will probably will stay forever. The fuel modifiers that we did for TPS, that might not stay the same actually. So it was just a quick way to fiddle around with it. But anyway, the major difference that we changed, we added a whole bunch to this table, so that we are adding more fuel during cranking at whatever temperature. It's probably never really going to start. Well, it might start back up in these, but for the most part, we increased the amount of extra fuel that it's adding during cranking with the standard table right here. I think the table that makes the biggest change though is, and shout out to Turbo John, he's the where I saw this from. I think it was actually Devin who gave him the idea, but either way, this is a really, really clever table that they suggested using, and this is basically just for really low fuel pressure, so anything from 0 psi of fuel pressure all the way up to about 9 psi in fuel pressure. It has a drastic increase in fuel so that it basically just forces the injectors to open up and let in whatever we can into the cylinder so that we can hopefully fire off of that early. Otherwise, we sit there cranking for a decent amount of time before fuel pressure is able to build up to a workable fuel pressure like 15 psi or 20 psi or something like that. So I think this is a huge help. I'd like to get some logs later on and actually show it navigating through this table like while we're cranking initially. But I don't use this table on another mechanical pump customer that I have, and I think we'll probably add this table to it. We were thinking about the possibility of having to control engine temp with the fuel. It's pretty amazing how what a big difference it makes with more or less fuel going into the engine, how with this fuel and the amount of fuel that we're pouring through it really does steal a lot of the heat away. So one of the things that we're thinking of doing is creating an advanced table that will be controlled either by one of his switches on his panel, or we can even put a digital switch on the dash, but we want him to be able to push it in case we want to keep the motor a little bit cooler. What we'll do is just create two tables, one that's going to modify the fuel flow. It's going to be a fuel flow offset table. So we're going to pour some more fuel in. So that the other table that we would make is a target air fuel ratio offset. So what we're going to be doing is once he activates, this will both be activated on the same switch. We'll create a digital switch or physically wire it to one on his panel. But what this is going to do is it's going to target a richer air fuel at idle, and then the other table is going to add a bunch of fuel to the entire table, so that closed loop isn't the only thing that's going to help it get to that new target air fuel. So while this switch is on, let's say normally we're targeting like a 4.9 air fuel, then we would want to, let's see, so normally we're targeting 4.9. Let's say when we want to keep things really cool, we want to bring it down to 3.9. And so we'll just put -1 in this table, and that will basically subtract from the target air fuel table that we have here. And by the way, this will probably change a little bit as well. We just did this really quick to get it started up. But yeah, so whatever is in this table, taking into account also this table, which right here there's no modifiers whatsoever, so it's basically just running off of this target air fuel table. Normally, let's say this would say 4.9 if we can get it to idle there and it's happy. So this other table, sorry, I had it wrong initially, a fuel flow multiplier, that would basically just help offset the fuel in the base table to meet the new target air fuel table. So let's say 12%. All the way across the board. So whether he's driving around in the pits, he's got a rev or whatever, it's going to have 12% across the board, and across the board it's going to be a full point richer target air fuel. Hopefully, maybe this isn't going to be needed. Honestly, I'm a little bit new with dealing with methanol and its effects, to an engine. So it's possible that we don't even have to worry about this. But what I'm really always worried about with a motor that doesn't have any coolant in it at all, is temps. I don't want to hurt this engine. And sometimes you have to run your car a little bit longer than you originally intended. So we want to make sure that we are prepared for that just in case. So we'll see how it goes. We'll test it out. I'll let you guys know how it's going. But as always, I really, really do appreciate you guys watching the videos. And the next one will probably be of this car on the dyno, testing out all of our theories, getting used to this new fuel, and seeing if we can control a giant blower, down about half capacity. So we'll see. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, shoot me a comment in the bottom. Let me know what you thought. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.